forgot to sign this, and the appraisal has got to be redone, and the inspector hadn't sent in their report. Like you're at the last minute. There's just all of these things that you got to manage right at the end. That's the way projects tend to be. That's the way goals tend to be. Like right at the end. And there's that temptation right at the end because of that laundry list of things that happen to kind of throw your hands up in the air and go, oh, it's just not worth it. All right, let's just put it off. Let's just stop where we are. I don't want to deal with it anymore. There can be that. I'm almost to the finish line and I'm just out of gas. A couple of thoughts. Like if that's you, if whatever the thing is in your life, if you're right at the end or when you get there at some point in your life, here's a couple of things I would say to you. When the stress of finishing the project builds up, remember the reason you started. Right? Go back in your mind to the beginning and ask yourself, why did we start down this road in the first place? Why did we think this was a good idea in the first place? Right? You may no longer think it's a good idea, but back at the beginning, you thought it was a good idea for some reason. We wanted to do this. We were all in for some reason. What were those reasons? And then jump to the other end, go from the beginning, past where you are now to when it's completed, when the stress of finishing a project builds up. Remind yourself why this goal will matter once it's completed. Right? It's easy to look at that long list of last things that you need to do to cross the finish line and just how big of a mountain that is to climb or how much you don't want to do that. That's the moment you need to ask yourself, but if we push through and finish, how are things going to be better? Right? Buying and selling, refinancing. I don't want to get all the paperwork out. I don't want to do all of that. That's when you need to remind yourself, look, if I just do this, if I just take a Saturday, if I just take a few hours, if I just take whatever it's good, if I just do this, we're going to be in a better financial situation once it's over. It's no fun right now, but once we get there. If we just sell the house and move, we're going to be closer to where the kids go to school. We're going to be closer to work. We're going to be in the car less. We're going to have a bigger house. We're going to have a smaller house. We're going to have a bigger yard. We're going to have a smaller yard. Whatever it is for you, that the other side of this goal, what the benefits will be, remind yourself of that, because right at the end, like Rocky in a boxing match, it's just punch after punch after punch. We get to Nehemiah 6 in our story. They have almost finished the project. They're right at the end, and even though they're right at the end, they aren't completely finished yet. There's still challenges. And even though they're right at the end, as we'll see, the critics haven't gone away. They're still creating chaos. Here's what happens. Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 1. When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono, but they were scheming to harm me. Before we get into the drama of the critics, let's say this. Finishing is hard but vital. Finishing is hard but vital. Finishing is challenging but vital. We need finishers. Right? I know Nehemiah's just kind of giving us information, but I don't know if you noticed when we read it, he said, we had finished the walls, but I hadn't set the doors in the gates, which means they hadn't finished, right? Which means it wasn't done. Have you ever asked your kids to do something that was probably going to take about 30 minutes, and they came back in 2 minutes and said, I'm done? You ever had that experience? You know they could not have finished whatever it was in 2 minutes. This was easily a 20-minute job, probably a 30-minute job. 2 minutes, they're back. I'm done. And then you walk in their room and you realize, not done. Not done. They may think it's done, not done. Or you look at the yard where you told them to do something, not done. And when my kids were younger, I would say, it looks better, but what about that pile of clothes in the corner? And they would say, oh, I'm done except for that part, which means you're not done, right? If I'm done is followed by except for, then you're not done. I'm done, but then you're not done. I'm done, I just have to do one more thing. You're not done. Tell your kids that. Tell your husbands that, all right? I can speak for the husbands, right? You're not done. You got to finish all the way. Nehemiah is at that point where he's almost done, but he's not done. Right? We need finishers. Right? We need finishers in the world right now. It's great to start. Take some energy to get started. Take some vision. Take some momentum to get started. But getting started is not the same as finishing. We need finishers. Now, one of the reasons it's difficult to finish is because the critics are persistent. Right? Just as you're trying to finish up, the naysayers, the discouragers, they're still hanging around. I mean, if we want to credit the critics with anything, let's credit them with being persistent. They don't give up. And when we begin Nehemiah chapter 6, he's almost finished, and the critics are still there. Now, you may have noticed when we read it, they've changed their tactic. They're no longer being sarcastic, and they're no longer attacking. They're no longer making fun of, they're no longer taking those little jabs at everybody. They're no longer intimidating. They didn't bring the army this time. They've completely changed their tactics. This time they send a note that says, come, let us meet together in one of the villages. We just want to talk. Can we grab coffee sometime? Are you free for lunch? We just hang out. I just got a couple of questions. They've completely softened their tactic to, hey, can we just talk? But Nehemiah knows their intent is to do him harm, perhaps to kill him. If they can lure him away from Jerusalem, if they can lure him away from the safety of the city, they can teach him a lesson. Right? But potentially, they can make him completely disappear. We just want to talk. And Nehemiah knows, no, you don't want to just talk. I said 2 weeks ago that there are times to evaluate, to work through critique. Like sometimes critique can be helpful. Sometimes it can make us better. There are times to weigh criticism. Or should I listen to this? Is this person trying to be helpful? There are times to give critique. Right? There are times for the sake of another person, for the sake of an organization, for the sake of the project, let me offer some suggestions. There are times to do that. That's not what's happening here. Right here, the critics have come to be destructive. We could say it simply like this. There are some people who don't want to help you. They want to hurt you. There are some people who don't want to help you. They're not giving this information to help you. They're trying to discourage you. They're trying to distract you. They're trying to minimize you. They're trying to keep you from what God has called you to do. There's some people, they're not trying to help you with their criticism. They're trying to hurt you. Now, they may think they're trying to help you, but their criticism keeps coming again and again and again, and it's discouraging and it's defeating. That's what Nehemiah is facing here. He's not facing helpful critique. He's facing harmful criticism. Sometimes it's difficult to know the difference. Right? When you're with someone, it's difficult to know, are they offering this in a helpful way or in a hurtful way? Eventually you figure it out though, right? And once you figure it out, don't forget. Right? What's the popular saying? When someone shows you who they are, believe them. Right? Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, they've all shown who they are. They all shown what their intent is. They didn't suddenly get on Nehemiah's side and say, you know what, all that in the past, we're going to leave it in the past. We're really here to help you. They had already shown who they were. So here's how Nehemiah responds, verse 3. So I sent messengers to them with this reply, I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why would the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. Critics are consistent. Nehemiah is consistent. I just kept telling them the same thing. I am carrying on a great work. God has called me to something significant. I don't have time to come talk to you. I don't have time to have more conversations with you. Here's what's true. What's true about our lives. Clarity on what God has called you to do prevents you from getting distracted by the critics. Clarity on what God's called you to do. God has called me to do this. God has given me an important work. God has given me a role and a calling, and I'm not going to get distracted by the critics who continue to show up as I'm working. Nehemiah says, I'm not even going to waste time. Because in order for me to have a conversation with you, I have to leave what God's called me to do. I have to walk away from this wall that God has put me on. And that means the wall's not getting rebuilt while I'm trying to satisfy all of your critiques. I'm not going to do it. God's given me a great project. I'm focused on what God's called me to do. I'm not going to spend time addressing you every time you have a question, because here's what I can guarantee you. One meeting is never enough for the critics. One meeting's never enough. If you come off the wall once to go have a meeting, the next day they're going to want another meeting. And they're going to want another meeting. They're not going to suddenly say, oh, I get it. I understand it now. You've already explained it and they didn't get it. One more meeting is not going to solve it. But every time you pause what you've been called to do to address the critics, you're stepping away from the work that God wants for you. You're taking time and energy and effort and emotion away from where God has positioned you. Nehemiah said it 4 times. I'm not coming down. This is what God has called me to do, and I'm not stepping away from it for you. You may have noticed, people like to argue today. Right? People have opinions today. People have sides. People have positions. People like to argue. Like they like to mix it up. They like to prove that you're wrong and they're right. But here's the thing. The whole time you're engaging in that argument, you're not giving attention to the work that God's really called you to do. You're not giving attention to the relationships God's called you to. You're not giving attention to the environments that God has called you to. Here's something really helpful for all of us in the time that we live in. You don't have to explain yourself to everybody. You don't. There's no requirement in the Bible, in the law, on our conscience. There's no requirement that you have to explain yourself to everybody. That's Nehemiah. I'm not going to explain myself. God's called me to this. I'm not going to explain myself every time. What you and I have to figure out is, what has God called me to? Where am I supposed to be giving my energy and my heart and my passion? Instead of spending all of my time trying to satisfy those who are simply trying to discourage me. To me, a funny place in the book of Proverbs, I don't know if you ever read the Bible and find funny places. If you don't, just read the Bible. There's a bunch of funny places in the Bible. This is one of those for me. This is Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5. This is exactly how they read in the Scriptures, one right after the other. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. Very next verse. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. Proverbs 26, 4 and 5. Don't answer a fool. Very next verse. Answer a fool. Right? So obviously there's some balance there. I think priority, because do not answer a fool comes first. I think that's the default setting for those of us who are following God. The default setting is, I'm just not going to get in those arguments. I'm just not going to answer every critic. I'm not going to mix it up every time there's a discussion going on in the break room, online, in my neighborhood. Do not answer a fool according to his folly. And here's why. Or you yourself will be just like him. We've seen that before, haven't we? Someone started an argument somewhere online or in person or at work, and someone else decided to set them straight. Right? I'm gonna have words with this person, and before it was all over, they both look crazy, don't they? Like the person who was going to set things straight looks like just as big a fool as the person who started it. I know you've seen it online. Right? Somebody says something crazy and somebody steps in and tries to bring kind of an objective word maybe at first, which then devolves into this back and forth, and then you step back and you go, well, both of them crazy, right? Both of them are foolish. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you're going to look just like him. But then second, answer a fool according to his folly, or he'll be wise in his own eyes. There are times, due to the arrogance or due to the fact that people are starting to believe this person. People are starting to line up behind this. There are times that with wisdom and prayer, we need to step in and say something. Nehemiah has said very little to the critics. Right? He's taken the position of, I'm not going to answer a fool according to their folly. I'm going to keep working on what God has called me to work on. Verse 5. Remember, they've sent the message 4 times. Then the 5th time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message. So now a 5th time. And in his hand was an unsealed letter in which was written, it is reported among the nations, and Geshem says it's true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king, so come, let's meet together. You don't want to talk about it yet. And so they list all of these complaints, all of them made up, in what the Bible describes as an unsealed letter. Some translations say a public letter. In other words, they're broadening their attack. An unsealed letter or a public letter in Nehemiah's day was a letter that could be written by that could be read by anyone. Anyone could ask for that information. Anyone could see that. Anybody could see the accusation. So now, rather than just a back and forth with Nehemiah, they're now publicizing their critique. Right? They're subtweeting. Right? They're leaving a scathing review on Yelp so everybody can see how they feel about this person. They're posting it on Facebook and setting it to public setting. I want as many people as possible to see the charges that we have against them. And then they say, it's being reported among the nations, right? Which is their way of saying, a lot of people are talking about this. A lot of people are saying it. Followed by, and Geshem says it's true. But come on. Geshem's been like their best friend from the beginning. Like, he doesn't even count. Right? He's been one of them from the beginning. What does it matter that Geshem thinks it's true? Right? You ever find that? People saying, oh, well, so-and-so says it's true. Well, of course they say it's true. They're your best friend. Right? They've been your best friend since middle school. And both of you still act like you're in middle school. So yeah, of course they're on your side. That's kind of what he's saying. Geshem says it's true. This is going to be a problem, Nehemiah. And what they're accusing Nehemiah of is setting himself up as king. He's really in it for power. He's really trying to take over. And this is going to get back to the king of Persia, which they don't seem to know that Nehemiah has a good relationship with the king of Persia. At the same time, if enough people believe this, if enough people begin to be suspicious of Nehemiah's motives, this could create problems. Publicly, they're circulating things that aren't true. Now, let me make a point, and I don't know who all this point is for, and maybe it's just for me. Maybe this is just a point for me. But let me make a point about sort of false accusations circulating. You can't always save people from believing the lies that your critics tell about you. You can't always save people when it's public, when they're airing this information publicly, when they're exaggerating things about you, when they're lying about you, when they're giving misinformation about you. You can't always rescue all the people who hear that information. You don't always even know all of the people who hear that information. When this sort of thing first starts, there's typically a desire to defend yourself, right? Well, I don't want people to believe that about me. Well, let me see if I can talk to them. Let me tell them my side of the story. Let me try to straighten things out because they're believing something that's not true. Like there's this instinct to defend yourself. But here's the reality. You don't always control where all that information goes. Like if somebody's decided to make stuff up about you, if people have decided to exaggerate things about you, you won't always be able to sit down with every person and say, okay, let me tell you my side. Okay, well, let me tell you what really happened. You don't have that sort of control. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying you have to let go of some of that burden. You have to let go of some of that burden of, well, I got to make sure everybody knows the truth. Well, I got to make... You may not be able to rescue everybody from those lies. Right? If you're going to attempt things for the kingdom of God, if you're going to say yes when God gives you a big task, I can promise you there are going to be people who don't like it. There are going to be people who are suspicious of your motives. There are going to be people who don't like you for whatever reason. There are going to be people who exaggerate and mislead, and you're going to have to accept that there are going to be some people who are just going to believe it. Like you can't spend all of your energy trying to track that down. You got to stay on the wall. You got to keep building. You got to keep moving forward. Let's move on. Nehemiah's response to that moment, this public letter. This is my favorite Nehemiah response of the whole book. If I could give a trophy for first place in responses, this is the trophy right here. Verse 8, I sent this reply, nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. Like, isn't that beautiful? Like, you're lying. Like everything, the whole thing's a big lie. And I'm not going to waste my time. Now, if people want to believe it, that's on them. That's not on me. Like, if they want to believe I'm that person, that's on them. You're lying. I don't have time for this. God has called me to some things, and I'm going to give myself to those things. You're lying. You're just making it up out of the top of your head. At the same time, Nehemiah knows why they're doing this. There is a motive to the critics. This is verse 9. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking, their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. Nehemiah knows there is a danger when there are critics, that eventually we get tired. We get discouraged. We're tired of answering the same accusation. We're tired of the 10th person coming and repeating a lie that they heard from somebody else and us having to say, no, that's not true. I never did that. No, that's not who I am. You know me. You know that's not who I am. Nehemiah knows fatigue can begin to set in. And especially when those attacks come from the inside, right? The critics from the outside are not nearly as discouraging as the critics from the inside. And we don't have time to read it, but if you look at verses 10 through 13 and 17 through 19, there were people in Jerusalem who were working with the critics to feed them information and get information back. There were people who were supposed to be prophets. They were supposed to be religious leaders. You read verses 10 through 13. There were religious leaders who were trying to trap Nehemiah because they were working with the critics on the outside. I mean, it's discouraging when people you don't really know begin to attack you. It's really discouraging when people who are up close begin to question you, begin to critique you in an unhealthy manner. But listen, I'm going to tell you, if you're going to follow God, if you're going to step out in faith, if you're going to answer God's call when He gives you a wall to build, when He gives you a project to pursue, when He gives you a mission, when He gives you a vision for what He wants you to do, you're going to be criticized. And some of that criticism is going to come from far away. And the reality is some of that criticism is going to come from really close. Really close. And that's going to hurt. That's going to be discouraging. So what do you do? What did Nehemiah do? Nehemiah responded in two ways in chapter 6. Nehemiah prayed. That was his first response. Nehemiah prayed. Now this isn't the first time we've written that down in our notes, right? All throughout the book of Nehemiah stopped to pray. Matter of fact, when we get done with this study, it'd be good to go back and read the whole book again and just mark how many times Nehemiah prayed. Quick prayers, long prayers, prayers that are given to us in the Scriptures, and times when it just says he prayed really fast. All throughout this book, Nehemiah's prayed. Nehemiah knew we are susceptible to wearing out under the work that we're having to do and under the criticism that we're having to face. So at the end of verse 9, the Bible says, "But I prayed," and here was his prayer, "Now strengthen my hands. Don't let them win. Don't let us give out. We're right at the end, God, and we are so tired. We're tired of the attacks. We're tired of the work. We're tired of the insiders who have turned against us and are working with the outside. We are tired. How am I going to respond to that? I want to pray. God, strengthen our hands. Down in verse 14, he specifically prays about his critics and his enemies. God, don't let them win. God, don't let them win. This is for your glory. Don't let them win. Throughout this whole process, Nehemiah is praying. Now, what does praying have to do with building a wall? Everything. It has everything to do with what God has called you to do. Whatever that thing is, building a wall, serving your community, caring for foster kids, taking care of the orphan, serving the widows, doing missions, serving in student ministry, serving in children's ministry. Prayer has everything to do with what God has called you to accomplish. So throughout the entire process, whatever that thing is, pray. And there are going to be times when you're going to be tired and weak. Pray. Now strengthen my hands. Don't let me give out. Don't let them win. This is for your glory, God. Pray. Nehemiah prayed. And then second, Nehemiah let the work speak for itself. Nehemiah let the work speak for itself. The critics were loud. The critics were persistent. The critics were discouraging. The critics wanted to stop what God was doing. The critics wanted to distract God's leaders from what they had been called to. But Nehemiah kept praying, and he kept building, and he kept praying, and he kept building until verse 15. So the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days. There it is. There it is. The enemy came against us. The critics rose up against us. I didn't respond other than to tell them they're filthy liars. Other than that, I didn't respond. I just kept building. 52 days later, Nehemiah goes, this is what God did. This is what, just look at it. You know how to respond to critics? You want to know how to respond to discouragement? Just let the work that God is doing speak for itself. Right after that, in verse 16, when all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence because they realized this work has been done with the help of our God. It's been done. And you couldn't stop it. You couldn't discourage us. You couldn't distract us because God was getting His work done. Let the work speak for itself. When people don't understand your faith, you don't have to argue with them about it. Just let your life speak for itself. When people don't understand the boundaries you put around your marriage and how you honor your spouse, you don't have to explain it. Just let your marriage speak for itself. When people don't understand how you parent, I can't believe that were you born in the 50s? No, you're kind of, sort of close. I don't get it. It's 2021. Let your family speak for itself. People don't understand the time that you give to serve and care for others. People don't understand your generosity, the fact that you give to help those in need. You give to support kingdom work. People don't understand. Why would you just give your resources? Just let your generosity speak for itself. That the work that God is doing in you speak for itself. So not in arrogance, not in a prideful way. But there'll come a point where you'll just be able to say, This is what we've been working on. This is what God's been doing. There it is. God wants to do that in your life, in your marriage, in your family, in your goals, in your future, in the way you serve, the way you give. God wants to give you and me some, hey, there it is moments. There it is. To the glory of God. There it is. God, I pray that we would not be distracted. We would not be discouraged. We would not give in. We would not give out. We would not let our fears and fatigue overtake us. We'd stay on the wall. And we'd say frequently, no, I can't come down and address that. God's got me doing something bigger. No, I'm not going to explain myself, because in order to explain myself, I'd have to take time away from what God's doing right now, so that one day we stand back and say, to the glory of God, there it is. There it is. Work in us and work through us. I pray it in Jesus' name.